in 2019, the first time capsule buried by Stumpy Sanderson and his gang of mischievous working-class boys, and which was actually an old Watney's Party 7 can, was unearthed. Then in 2023, the second time capsule, which was an old Courage Jackpot Bitter Party can, was discovered. And now, Whistling 5 Anarchic Productions, in conjunction with the 1970s Cigarette Appreciation Club and Puffer Patterson's Benevolent Fund for Aging Thespians, proudly presents Series 2 of Stumpy Sanderson's 1970s stories, and the 22 stories found in that second time capsule. As narrated by Andrew Brammer. Bonjour, bon après-midi, et bonsoir. The story you are about to hear is narrated in the first person, because I, just like Stumpy, witnessed firsthand the momentous events which it describes. So, let's park up the rally chopper, dim the lava lamp, switch off that episode of Catweasel, finish up the plate of Vesta beef curry, crack open a can of Double Diamond, light up a mannequin cigar, and kick back, sit back, and listen in to the anarchic and outrageous japes, scrapes and capers of Stumpy Sanderson and his gang. For this story, we head back to 1979 for Chipolata Mick and the flight of the Pink Zeppelin. In the history of mankind, there have been some truly great feats of aviation engineering and ingenuity, and one that surely must rank up there with the greatest was the singular flying machine launched one day in combined science by Chipolata Mick and Lanky Shinton, a potent balloon whose epic and historic flight would go down in myth and legend. Chipolata Mick and Lanky Shinton, two of the oldest and tallest boys in our year, with spiky punk hairstyles, who were both also prodigiously gifted artisans and craftsmen, and who regularly put their creative skills to seditious and subversive use through the organisation they ran, called the Constructors of Anarchy. Chipolata and Lanky had first got the seeds for their idea in Mr. Banhofer's history class, when we had briefly covered the subject of aerial warfare during the First World War. These seeds had further sprouted when a screening of the 1975 movie The Hindenburg was shown on TV, and most of our lot had watched and then discussed it. But the final nourishment of their evil weed of an idea had taken root when we started covering a subject that was to provide the fuel for the plan in combined science. This was when Chipolata and Lanky had been sitting at the back of the class as usual, when we had been learning from that strict disciplinarian, Mr. Cunningham, all about certain gases being lighter and less dense than air, including those used in mighty airships. Then, unbelievably, and with extraordinary coincidence and synchronicity with what we had been talking about over the past few days, he explained to us in detail how the mighty Zeppelins of old worked. Now, Cunningham's scientific enlightenments went completely over most of our heads, although Stephen Brookman, that communist genius member of our gang, with the swept-back Chairman Mao hair, round-rimmed Trotsky glasses, and a starling greatcoat, did try to explain it to us later on the way home from school, but we were as baffled by his explanations as by Mr. Cunningham's. It was when we were told by Cunningham that in the next lesson we would be having a test about these gases and their various uses that Chipolata got his brainwave, and after the lesson had finished, Chipolata, grinning with that great subversive grin of his, said with a sinful twinkle in his eye, "I've had a great idea, lads, for some chaos and to wind Cunningham up. Next lesson, look to the skies." Now, This was a risky strategy, for although we had often tried to goad the large-framed Mr. Cunningham with our subversive activities, he was a particularly strict and brutal disciplinarian, whose habit of handing out detentions and severe punishments meant he was viewed and feared by many as an autocratic symbol of repression and authoritarianism. However, when at the morning break, Chipolata and Lanky told Stumpy and I what had been devised and planned, and what part we needed to play, we couldn't help marvel at the sheer warped bravado of the plot. So, in our next combined science lesson, we all took our usual positions at the back of the class, and following a brief recap by Cunningham, and after 2 of the class had handed out the papers with the test questions, we opened our exercise books. Cunningham ordered quiet, and the test began. While Cunningham sat stone and mean-faced at his front desk, heavy in his concentration of marking essays and tests from some of his other classes, Stumpy nudged me, and I looked across to see Chipolata Mick bending down from his desk, hidden from view, and pulling from his pocket a blue packet he had deviously obtained from a certain type of vending machine a couple of nights ago. Opening the packet, Chipolata pulled out a flat-looking circular pink object, and then began to puff and blow steadily into it, at the same time trying to keep his exhalations as quiet as possible. By his 4th blow, Chipolata, by now a bit red in the face with his exertions, had expanded the thin pink material to the size of a saucily shaped large balloon. But it was at this point that Mr. Cunningham suddenly, and without warning, looked up from his marking, sat bolt upright, laser-like eyes focusing on the bent-down form of Chipolata. "Simpson!" for that was Mick's surname. "What do you think you are doing, lad?" Pushing the balloon immediately under his desk, but with one hand holding the end of it so that no air would be expelled, Chipolata sat up, his face still red from all his blowing. "Sorry, sir, just tying my shoelace up." "Well, don't, lad!" Cunningham barked. "You don't need your shoes done up to take this test." We couldn't believe Chipolata's luck that Cunningham hadn't seen the pink inflatable that he was holding, and clearly preoccupied with his marking, Cunningham went back to his work. Waiting a couple of minutes to ensure the coast was clear, Chipolata gave one more blow, neatly tied the end of the dirigible, and now all the aerostat needed was its name, which when Lanky handed a black marker pen to Chipolata was duly emblazoned on its elongated form, the Pink Zeppelin. For the launch, Chipolata waited until 5 minutes of the test were remaining, and then, with the class totally silent, most still trying to finish their questions, others either staring blankly into space or looking gormlessly out of the window, Cunningham still engrossed in his marking, he propelled the Pink Zeppelin into the air above his head and towards the front of the class. As that mighty pink blimp rose and floated above the second from back row, heading painfully and bloated towards its destination, Stumpy and I both now took up our parts in the plan. "Look, sir, it's the Pink Zeppelin!" shouted Stumpy. With that, the rest of the class looked round, looked up, and with some now realising what the extraordinary balloon had been constructed from, and seeing the writing on its sides, roared with laughter. Chaos and anarchy ensued. "It's the Hindenburg, sir!" I exclaimed. "No, it's the R101!" someone else shouted. By now, Cunningham, who had at first looked on stunned in disbelief at the commotion, now rose from his desk with a look of pure thunder and fury on his raging face. "What the devil? Who is responsible for this outrage?" And then, suddenly, and without cue or warning, Slack-Jack Arnold, that tall boy with lank fair hair, droopy eyes, and a conspiratorial grin, stood up from his desk, from his pocket produced his cigarette lighter, and with one flick of the switch, lit a flame, reached up, and with a great pop, the great swollen and enlarged balloon burst, the material instantly, and as if by some dark magic, shrivelling away and vanishing into thin air. As great gasps and laughter went round the class, Cunningham, who was by now apoplectic, strode down the room to the sight and scene of the disaster. Stumpy quickly shouted, "Are you okay, sir? You look like you've seen a mirage." "What the blazes are you on about, Sanderson? You all saw that, didn't you? Shinton, you saw it? Brookman, you saw it?" "Saw what, sir? We didn't see anything at all," we all answered from the back. And with that, with any evidence destroyed into barely discernible faint traces of ash on the floor, which were quickly scuffed away, and now with the collective memories of the class combining together to create a wall of head-scratching denial, brilliantly employed to make Cunningham doubt his own sanity, and with no one able to recall anything of the existence of, or the flight of, the pink Zeppelin, due to the lack of any evidence or solid testimony, the only offence that Cunningham could reasonably prosecute anyone for was Slack Jack Arnold producing a cigarette lighter in class, for which he duly received a lunchtime detention. Thank you for listening to this episode of Stumpy Sanderson's 1970s Stories. And please don't forget to check out the other stories from Series 2 and Series 1. You can also follow Stumpy Sanderson's 1970s Stories on Facebook, where you can keep up to date with all the news about live shows and other Stumpy events. There's also the website, www.stumpysanderson.co.uk, and the Stumpy Sanderson's 1970s Stories YouTube channel. And you can get in touch with me at andrew@stumpysanderson.co.uk. Until the next story, au revoir et bonne nuit, and keep grooving.
Yeah. This podcast has been recorded using a DIY punk rock philosophy. Yeah.